On January 13th, I was diagnosed with stage 4 metastatic adenocarcinoma. That means the cancer has spread through my lymph nodes. The past 2 weeks have absolutely been a blur, and to be quite honest, a kind of a surreal nightmare that I feel like I keep wanting to wake up from.
Alissa Perez, thank you so much for joining us at Worldview Wellness to talk to us about your journey with cancer, remission, and the Lord.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here today.
Alissa, did you ever think that you would be in this position? Did you ever think that you would be sick, that you would get cancer, that you would have to go through treatments, that you would have to reconsider your life in any way?
The simple answer is no. I am a physician assistant, and I have always, treated patients and seen other people's sicknesses and illnesses, and I've prayed for other people and the trials that they have gone through. And I just was not expecting this to be my story and my journey. But obviously, the Lord's plans are not ours. And he had a different plan for my life than I did. When I received the diagnosis on January 13th of 2021, it was a Wednesday, and I had been praying and hoping and wishing and beseeching the Lord that it would not be anything bad, anything like cancer. But when I received that diagnosis, they called me, the surgeon called me at about 1 p.m. and said, "Alissa, you have high-grade metastatic adenocarcinoma, and we don't know where it's coming from." And from that point forward, it was just a blur and overwhelming, and I was not prepared for what was about to happen.
Alissa, what was your first reaction when you were told that you had cancer? What was the feeling that immediately dominated you in that moment?
Sheer terror and panic and shock. I can remember hearing it. I didn't cry at first. It was just this, okay, thank you for calling me. And I stopped and I called my neighbor to come watch my kids, and I jumped in the car and drove to my husband's office. And it was at that moment that I told him what I had just heard that it hit me. that this is real, that this is serious, that this is my worst nightmare come true. And so absolute sheer panic and fear would be probably my first reactions.
Found out about my wife's cancer diagnosis when she came to see me at my office. She walked through the door and I just knew, the look on her face, and we had been waiting for it.
And we both just started crying, and there weren't really any words.
Fear, unknown, concern, how much cancer, what stage.
After a few days, it was kind of a whirlwind, overwhelming, between all the doctor's visits and the appointments, and just trying to figure out where this was coming from and what this was and what this looked like and what the prognosis looked like. So it was about 2 weeks of, I would call, pure hell. I ended up with a pneumothorax in my lung due to the port placement, and just painful and unknowing. Just the unknown was just so overwhelming.
We were ultimately told we had about 18 months. First of all, I didn't want to see the suffering that I felt was about to start occurring. I didn't want my children to see the suffering that I felt and deterioration that I felt was about to occur. But then, your mind can't help but to move forward, that if it truly does come to fruition, what am I going to do? Now I have 3 children of school age, elementary school age, and how am I going to raise them?
A lot of conversations of just, why and why me, and trying to find some answers. And that first 2 weeks was pretty devastating. But in that 2 weeks it was about at that 2-week mark where life turned around, and there was this ultimate surrender to the Lord. When I realized that the life that I had planned, everything that I had ever dreamed of, was over as I had envisioned it. That the life that I now lived was for Christ alone, and it wasn't the life that I had planned.
But I will tell you that when Alissa decided to fight, I knew that we would fight. And when I saw her dedication, I knew that we would win.
There was a lot of sleepless nights, a lot of moments of just angst and worry and fear. I had a huge surrounding of people around me, with a community from church and our homeschool community, and just so many people in my family who loved me and were praying for me. But it was a very lonely journey in the beginning, because there was no one besides the Lord who really knew what I was going through and what I was experiencing. And so I would come out to my chair in the living room and spend hours throughout the night just opening up his word and begging him to speak to me. And it was truly after a few weeks of just so much unease and just discomfort emotionally and physically, and just so much struggle, that he finally beckoned me to let go. And I can remember I was in my living room on my knees before my fireplace, and it's where he called me to just surrender. And I let go, and I truly surrendered my life again to what God's will was for me. And I had this vision of Jesus in the garden, and when he is begging the Lord, and yet he says, "Lord, not my will, but yours be done." And there was a moment after a few weeks where I finally could say, "I don't want this, Lord, but whatever your will is, I want that, because I want you. I don't even know what to ask for anymore. I don't know what I don't know what you're asking me to do, but I surrender it to you now." Just every single day, his word was just crying out to me, and repetitively, from the beginning, his word was telling me, "I'm going to heal you." And I stood on that word, and I continued to pick myself up and say, "All right, if this is what the Lord has for me, then I'm going to face it head on." And it was only through the grace of God and through my faith that gave me the strength to be able to take one foot in front of the other. And he kept reminding me, do not look forward, do not look ahead to tomorrow, focus on one day at a time, and live abundantly in the day that I have given you. And as I did that, my strength and my faith grew and grew and grew. But it gave me enough strength. This was, obviously right before I started chemotherapy at the end of January in 2021. And I was able to, start embarking on the journey with hope that I didn't maybe have right at the beginning. And I was able to really start this journey and say, okay, Lord, I'm going to walk this out, and you're going to work through me, and you're going to show your miraculous powers through me. One of the verses that he gave me right from the beginning, actually the night before my biopsy, we were at church praying, and it was Matthew 9:22. And it was when the woman who'd been bleeding for 12 years reaches out and just says, if I can touch his cloak, I will be healed. And as my husband and I were beseeching the Lord that night, that was the verse that he gave me, that if I would surrender to him, he is promising me, he says, daughter, your faith has healed you. And I clung to that verse, which I still do even to this day.
How did we move to action after our cancer diagnosis? Well, I had a feeling I knew who we were going to talk to, which was Dr. Ben at Veritas. I've been listening to the podcast for a couple of years.
I chose to pursue Veritas because of a good friend of mine who had been going there for years, and she was very familiar with the integrative medicine. And I had begun probably the year prior to my diagnosis, starting to really change some eating habits and really kind of pursuing that a little bit. But I still didn't have a grasp or a knowledge of what really integrative medicine was at that point. I was still pretty ingrained in my conventional medicine training. But the minute I was diagnosed, my friend reached out to Dr. Ben Edwards and said, hey, here's the story. My friend's been diagnosed with this. What do we need to do? And I was laying in my hospital bed in excruciating pain from my pneumothorax. And Dr. Ben had called me and reached out and shared some next steps for me to take. The first thing he told me to do was to grab Naisha Winter's book, The Metabolic Approach to Cancer. And I ordered that immediately and ordered a few other supplements, things to get started. And the day I got out of that hospital, I devoured that book, and everything in it was like a light bulb came on, a light bulb of hope, but a light bulb of truth. And I started just reading that, and then made an appointment with Dr. Ben, who then referred me to Micah Jackson, who is my current integrative provider.
In your journey with Veritas and Micah, it was not always smooth sailing. Let's talk about the metabolic approach to cancer. Let's talk about some of the roadblocks that you hit in the beginning and what that process looked like.
So I started right away. The minute I was diagnosed, I stopped eating all sugar. That was kind of the first step that I took, and changed my diet drastically, which was difficult at first. Obviously, starting chemo and making some adjustments there. But I had a huge team of people around me that were helping me to kind of succeed in this dietary approach. And when I started with Micah, it was exciting and new and hopeful, but it was hard. Changing your life is difficult, and it wasn't always smooth sailing. There were times when I was very frustrated with the fact that I couldn't have any sugar and I couldn't eat like everybody else, and I didn't understand yet. So much of our life is geared around food and celebration and different textures and flavors, and so there was certainly a learning curve there. And just learning all about the supplements and this whole new approach to treating cancer. I devoured book after book after book and sought, different websites and different YouTube channels and all these different things. And Micah was such an instrument in that. However, there was some things that Micah said at the beginning as well that were hard to hear. Some things that I realized that I had to let go of. I wanted someone to tell me that I was going to live forever, and that I was going to beat this cancer, and it was going to be, everything was going to go back to the way it was. And there is a transition period of realizing that the life that I lived was done. and that I was embarking on a new journey and a new life. And many years ago, the Lord gave me this mantra, I guess you would say, in my mind, this mission of living differently. And I never quite understood what he meant by that until then. And I started realizing that the Lord had called me to live differently. But in order to live differently, it's very difficult. It's a hard transition to do. There's a lot of things that we have to change within our life, but not only physically, also emotionally and mentally, and even spiritually. There's a lot of changes there. And so there was times of fear and frustration, of confronting my own shortcomings, confronting my own weaknesses within me, such as fear and struggling with that. And having to hear that, this is what I recommend you doing. Sometimes there was a process there. I had to kind of think through that and really process that before I said, oh, okay, this makes sense. This is truth. So there's a transition there, I believe.
Alissa, talk to me about the metabolic approach to cancer. With Worldview Wellness, that is absolutely what we adhere to and follow. We love Dr. Nasha Winters. We love the metabolic approach to cancer. We see that it works. How did you apply that to your own journey?
Well, like I said, I started reading the Metabolic Approach to Cancer book right away. And it's a very practical book. I would recommend it to anyone who's just been diagnosed with cancer. It's not a bunch of scientific data as much as it is just life application of how we can live a more whole, restored life through diet and mental changes and emotional work. The other thing that I did personally, and not everybody can do this, but I did join one of her programs to become an advocate, which helped me to go deeper with that and understand it better. Because at first, when people are diagnosed with cancer, you have so many decisions to make. There's so many questions of, is this the right way? And I remember praying over and over in Isaiah, the Bible promised me, but God said, I will show you the way you should go. And I kept praying and realizing that the more I trusted the Lord and the more I got into this metabolic approach and started really understanding what she was coming from and what this all entailed. And as I've grown in this through this advocate program, it makes the most sense. It's when I liken it to someone who has never found Jesus, doesn't know the Lord. And when they find Jesus, their eyes are opened to the truth of the gospel. And I liken it to the exact same way that for so many years, you believe a certain way of medicine, a certain way of treatment. And now I've been opening my eyes to the metabolic approach to cancer. And it is like truth that I have never seen before. It makes sense. And I have seen it work in my own life in the last 18 months.
Alissa, talk to me about how the metabolic approach to cancer paired with chemo worked for you.
So I believe with my whole heart and everything in me that my remission, my healing came from Jesus first and integrative care second. I did end up doing chemotherapy right from the beginning. I started that January 28th of 2021. At the same time, I also had started implementing all of the integrative approaches, such as, cutting out the sugar, changing my diet, high fats, starting the supplements, with many other integrative therapies, such as vitamin C infusions and sauna treatments and detox regimens, to name a few. But the chemo certainly was what I had decided to do at that time. And the metabolic approach to cancer helped me to just have sustainability through my chemotherapy. I actually had chemo every 3 weeks from January to July. And that entire time, I was able to continue homeschooling my children. I had very minimal side effects from the chemotherapy. I was able to maintain my strength. I learned how to play tennis during that time. I was able to live my life. Just knowing that I was eating differently, that my body, I was actually the healthiest I've ever been, probably as I embarked on this chemo journey, because I was doing all the things that my body needed to be healthy. So I'm very thankful. And the reason I say that I believe that Jesus and integrative care helped me reach remission is that at the end of my treatment, my physician from MD Anderson basically congratulated me on a clear scan and said, I never expected you to get any better with the chemo.
Good morning to everybody. I just wanted to give you some more encouragement, and if just in case you do not believe in miracles and have not believed that my healing is a complete miracle of the Lord, let me share this with you. I had my appointment with my MD Anderson physician this morning, and of course he congratulated me on a clear scan, and as we were talking, he commented about the uniqueness of my case. And I said to him, tell me what you mean by unique. Like, what does that really mean, that my case is unique? And he said to me, Alissa, when I saw your scan and how much cancer you had and your numbers, your CA-125 numbers, he said, I would never have predicted that you would have a completely clear scan and that your cancer would have gone away. He said, at best, I was hoping that we could keep it the same or maybe have a little improvement. And I was able to share that it is the Lord who has healed me and all the integrative things that I am doing. And he doesn't have an answer for me. His response to me was, whatever you're doing is working, and so keep doing it.
Using the metabolic approach to cancer, a terrain-based, true integrative functional model, we've seen it work time and time again. But what we have noticed is you can do all the things, take all the things, have everything just perfect. And if you don't have peace, you don't flourish physically. Talk to me about how important peace, mental stability, and spiritual health is as you embark on a journey like this.
It is vitally important. But I will tell a funny story about Micah and I. When we first started meeting, it was in April of that year. And we kind of done the deep dive, and I was still fearful. I was still struggling with some of those emotional things. Still, I believed in the metabolic approach. I was doing all the things that I needed to do. I had my faith, but that peace part was still a struggle. I still was worrying. I still was fearing, what was going to happen. And I can remember Micah suggesting me to talk to a counselor. And I was very, very put off by that at first, because I felt like I was good enough. Like my emotions, I had things under control, and I had a right to be afraid, and I had a right to worry, and I had a right to be in this lack of peace state.
Alissa was very nervous and fearful, understandably so. She'd just been given a diagnosis, and of course with her understanding as a medical provider, she's a physician assistant, so I knew that she would understand the diagnosis that she'd been given, and the statistics and odds to some degree that kind of come with with the diagnosis that she was given, which is not what nobody wants to be diagnosed with cancer, but to be told that you have stage 4 high-grade serous ovarian cancer is that's similar to a glioblastoma or a pancreatic cancer. None of those cancers have a very high degree of success with any therapy. So it was plainly obvious when she came in that she wanted to be told that we had it all taken care of, and that we would that we could heal her and that everything would be fine. I remember her talking about the fact that she wanted to raise her kids, and she wanted to do all of the things that parents want to do with their kids. She wanted me to tell her that everything was going to be okay, and that was a recurring theme over and over and over again. And I basically told her every time, I said, "No, Alissa, I can't promise you with what you've got. I can't promise you what the outcome's going to be. Only God knows the number of your days. All I can tell you is that we're going to deal with this in the way that I've been trained through the metabolic approach, and we're going to make a very thorough assessment, and we're going to give thorough recommendations, that's not necessarily what she wanted to hear. So that was my first impression. So Alissa at first was pretty resistant to some of the things that I was recommending for her. I think that probably one of the most critical pieces that she was resistant to was on the emotional, spiritual piece part of things, and I would tell her, this is one of the most important things. We need to get you in to see a counselor. We need to start working on that. We need to, resolve some of those unresolved emotional conflicts that come up, and even if you've got a perfect life, prior to your cancer diagnosis, a lot of that stuff comes up whenever you do get a cancer diagnosis. So even if that's it, which it never is, but even if that's it, you still need to be in some kind of therapy so that you can get to this place of peace and calm, and so that you're not letting fear and anxiety drive the boat. And she's no different to most of our other clients. The emotional and spiritual boats are the most difficult to walk people through and to get people to understand that's very, very important. And people that don't do that generally have a worse prognosis than people that are willing to go in and do that. So peace is important because your emotional state and your spiritual state, is important to your physiology. When somebody gets a diagnosis like that, the first things that pop that kind of come into the equation, even if they're not there prior, are fear and anxiety. When we're in a state of fear and anxiety, understandable or not, we send our adrenals into overdrive. We go into the sympathetic fight or flight physiology, which then shuts down our gut. So we lose our gut function, and then that shuts down our hormones, or also shuts down our hormones. So we lose a lot of the hormonal balance that we have. And it's not healthy for people to live in that fight or flight stage for long periods. We need to have a balance of, the sympathetic or fight or flight, that's an appropriate response to all kinds of different environmental stimuli. But then we also have to have that parasympathetic rest and digest element. And those things have to be in balance. And if they're not in balance and you're too heavy on one side, then your physiology isn't working optimally. And so when we're doing the metabolic approach to cancer, we're really looking at the terrain being all of the systems of your body and how they work together. And if you're in that fight or flight state, then you're not in balance. So that's really the underlying reason why that's so important.
There was much wrestling between me and the Lord. And I liken it to that because it's this, he is nudging me in a direction and then you push back, and it's this back and forth. And finally, the Lord revealed to me how vitally important peace really is. And the first step was kind of surrendering to the idea of talking to somebody. And it was one of the best decisions I ever made. It's that moment of humility that says, I don't have to have it all together. And I don't have to have everything figured out, because I'm a little bit of a perfectionist, a little bit of a, high-strung individual, have everything planned out. And it was the Lord reminding me that my peace I give you. This year, every year I pray for a verse. And this year for 2022 was Isaiah 26:3. And it says, you will keep in perfect peace those whose minds are steadfast because they trust in you. To remind me how vitally important that peace pillar is. And one thing even that I have noticed, and there's not really any scientific evidence of this other than what the Lord has shown me, but I get my monthly CA-125 levels done, and I have mapped them out that when I have a stressful month, if something, with things going on, my numbers tend to go up a couple points. And when I'm in a month that's pretty relaxing, they have improved. And so I know beyond the shadow of a doubt that our bodies respond to either a stressful environment or they're responding to peace. And so that is still, even 18 months later from the diagnosis, I have much improved, but I still work on that. And what the Lord is reminding me is that this is not something that you figure out once and you're done. This is a lifelong journey, because the enemy, the world around us, wants to keep us restless and busy and stressed and feeling like we can't just be at peace. And the Lord continues to remind me to be like Mary, to sit at the feet of Jesus and to do the one thing that he's asked us to do. And I love that verse in Luke 10, But Martha, we look at that verse and it feels like Martha, there's so many things to do. But what it has reminded me, it's our mind and the busyness of our mind, and how we have got to learn to meditate on God's word, to let go of everything that's around us, all the things that we want to do and the future plans or the past worries, and stay in today, to live in the moment, because that's where Jesus is. And Jesus promises us that when we rest in him, he will give us that peace. If I could encourage anyone in this journey, definitely to change their diet, definitely to do the integrative things that may help, but to truly work on their spiritual life and work on things that may help and will encourage this peace pillar is vital.
Speaking of thought processes, controlling our thoughts, controlling our emotions, getting into a mindset of Christ, which is healing. How do we take our thoughts captive? The Word of God says to take your thoughts captive to the obedience of Jesus Christ. How do we do that? What does that look like?
One thing that I am doing currently in my own life is when these thoughts come up, one of my biggest thoughts is just, I'm a perfectionist, and so I want my house to be clean, the kids' homeschool room, and everybody to do things a certain way. And I am learning to just call that out and recognize those as lies, and recognize that is the enemy. A little lesson I'm doing with my children here recently is whose voice is in your head? Is it God's voice? Is it your own voice, or is it the enemy's voice? And if it is God's voice, it will never condemn you. It will never make you feel shame or guilt or fear or worry. God's voice is always truth, and it is always life-giving. And so often we get so confused in our heads because we think that something, these thoughts that we're having may benefit us, but over time, they're actually killing us mentally and emotionally and physically. They're destroying our body physically. And so this isn't something that's going to happen overnight, but things that we can do are scripture. And I will show you, this is what I have done from the very beginning that the Lord has given me, is I have made 3x5 cards, and I read them daily, and they are life-giving truths that the Lord has given me to fill my mind with truth. I'm reading a book right now on the healing power of our words. And just to example, one of the verses, I have many, but Psalm 118 says, I will not die, but live. I will proclaim what the Lord has done. Psalm 112:7 says, I will not fear bad news. My heart is firm. I trust in the Lord. Isaiah 38:16 says, you restored me to health and let me live. Romans 9:17 says, I raised you up for this very purpose, that I might display my power in you and that my name might be proclaimed in all the earth. And all of these verses, I say them over and over to remind me of who I am, to remind me of who God is and what his truth is saying about me. And I think it is vital that we also really claim who we are, our identity in Christ. And I've been doing this with my children and with myself, is God calls himself the great I am. And he encourages us to say those things as well, that I am a child of God. I am loved. I am healed, to claim what God has already done for us. And when we live in that truth, we can start stepping away from the lies that Satan has been telling us about, that we are going to die, or we're not going to make it through this, or I am afraid. Start speaking words of truth and life into your own life. I am in remission. I've been in remission for a year, and I'm very thankful for that. But could my story have looked different? Absolutely. And I don't know what tomorrow brings. And my faith has increased tremendously through this journey. My prayer before all of this started, and I look back, I keep journals, and the day that I discovered my lymph node that was swollen, in my journal, I had prayed, Lord, increase my faith. He certainly did that, not the way I had planned. But what if he hadn't? What if things change in the future? What if? I just read in James this morning that said, whenever you face trials, consider it pure joy. He doesn't say if you face trials, he says when. There's always going to be trouble. And what I am learning is that the deeper I go into this journey, the closer I want to be with Jesus. The closer I am with him, the more easily it will be, I guess easily, but the more likely I will be to stay close to him, to be able to embrace whatever he gives me in the future. I prayed for healing. I was healed, but that's not the goal of this life. All of us will die. As I read the Bible in so many ways and times, Jesus healed person after person after person, but they all died. None of them are still alive. None of us live forever. And so what I am learning, I'm thankful for the life that I have right now, but I am learning that the life that he has given me isn't someday. It is this moment and this day. And that someday I won't be here and I won't be able to share things with my children. And I'm praying and believing that that's going to be when I'm 80, but I don't know what the life is. But we can spend our days in fear of what could happen, or we can rest in that God and trust him today, that he knows the plans for us and that he has given us this day. He has promised us that we have this day to make a difference and to glorify him and to share the gospel with the world.
How, Alissa, did you and your husband navigate this journey with your children?
That is a beautiful story. We didn't tell them at first the full details. They knew something was wrong. Obviously, mommy was gone to a lot of appointments and I was in the hospital. A friend of mine prayed over me, of course, and the children specifically, that they would be like little fish that would go down into the ocean. And when they came up, they would miss all the storm, that they would not really understand and grasp the storm. And that is exactly what happened. They stood beside me and walked this faith journey with absolute belief and faith that mommy was going to be healed. And they saw that I continued to do homeschool with them, that I was able to be at home, and not a whole lot changed during that time. Mama took a few more naps and there was, I didn't have any hair, but they walked that journey with me and believe. A few notable moments in that journey with my children, if I could share that with other people who have children and not sure what to do. We told them the minimum. We told them that mommy was diagnosed with cancer, but that we were going to fight this and that the Lord was with us and that we were going to, he was going to help mommy walk through this. And we were all going to pitch in and be a team during this time. And they accepted that and they believed that.
Gathered them around and we told them of the reality of that mommy has cancer. We explained to them kind of what it meant and where hers was and what or where it was from. But we also then told them the fight that was ahead of us, and we needed to be a team. We needed to be stronger than ever together. We needed to give each other a lot of grace. We were going to stick together no matter what, and we were all going to play a part in mommy's healing. And so we needed their help and support. And we feel by doing that is we had them buy in to the journey, regardless of which direction it ultimately went, they were going to be involved. And in this case, they see healing. And then they, even greater, is they see God's blessing on this healing. And it allowed them to understand faith a little bit better, I guess.
And something Naisha said at the very beginning that I took to heart and still do to this day, not religiously every day, but she said, if there was one thing that you could do for your journey in cancer, is to watch the sunset every day. And at the time I was like, really? Like that's what her recommendation is? But I started doing it. I trusted it and I started doing it. And it became a beautiful time of me resting with my tea and with the Lord, and my children would start coming. And I can remember one night just crying with my husband in my bedroom, and my daughter peeps her head around and says, "Hey mama, come on, you're missing your sunset. And she brought me out there, and it was just this reminder. And I tell them repetitively, when you see a sunset, I want you to always remember God and remember me. Because I didn't know if I was going to live at that point. And I thought, what a beautiful opportunity for them to always remember me. Oh my word. It was amazing to ring that bell, to just, the bell itself is just a device. It's just a sound. But when I walked out and I saw my children and my husband come to me to realize that we did this as a team, it wasn't just me. It wasn't me doing chemotherapy. It was our family, and that we succeeded, and we did it to the glory of the Lord. And not only that, I turned my head, and all of my friends and family came around the corner with signs and cheers to cheer me for finishing this chemotherapy.
We gathered a bunch of the friends, and I can't remember, there was a minimum of 40 people waiting outside. They were all hiding around the corner. I pretended it was just me and the kids picking her up, and then I waved them on, and they all came. And so she got to ring it in front of all these people, and they all had banners, they had signs. It was so unusual, I guess, that the people inside the building came out to see what was going on, because it doesn't normally happen. We were celebrating life. We were moving in such a positive direction because we were simultaneously all in on the integrative part, that even the nurses were like, we've just never seen this kind of healing before. Even her MD Anderson doctor was like, I don't know about any of that stuff. All I know is I didn't expect you to even get better. Every step of the way, we were blowing people away. And it was a reason to shout, yell, and praise God, and hallelujah to our friends who supported us throughout the journey.
It wasn't about the chemo. It wasn't about finishing the chemo. It's really such an analogy of what it's going to be like when we get to heaven. When Jesus looks at us and says, my good and faithful servant, I'm so proud of you. You have ran the race, and you have succeeded, and you did what I've asked you to do. May you be blessed. And that's what it felt like, that I was obedient to the Lord, and I was receiving that blessing from him through all my family and friends. It was a huge blessing.
Alissa, what would you tell somebody who has just found out that they have cancer? They've just received a cancer diagnosis, and their faith might be shaky, and the ground that they're standing on has just crumbled. What would you say to them?
I would say, surrender your life to the Lord. He has a plan for you. He is going to use this for good. God uses all things together for good, and it doesn't look good and it doesn't feel good, but God is good. And when the ground beneath you is shaking and erupting around you, stand firm on your faith and know that God will use this for his glory and for his good, and that you can do this. We can do hard things. We can do all things through Christ who strengthens us. And as horrible as the diagnosis is, as difficult as the journey in front of you looks, stand firm, take one step in front of the other, and live today. And sometime in the future, you will start feeling what you know to be true. Our faith is not always emotion. Our faith is truth, and we must stand on the truth of the Lord.